On December 30th, 2021, Ryan Reynolds posted something on Twitter that made millions of people laugh. He shared an interview where Betty White joked that he couldn't get over his crush on her, and he responded with perfect comedic timing, writing, "I'm absolutely sick of the media exploiting past relationships just to drive clicks." It was vintage Reynolds, the kind of playful jab that had defined their friendship for over a decade. Fans loved it. They commented, they laughed, they shared it. It was just another chapter in the ongoing joke between two of Hollywood's most beloved stars. But 24 hours later, everything changed. Betty White died. She was 99 years old, just 17 days shy of her 100th birthday, and suddenly, that tweet, that final joke between friends, became something else entirely. It became the last conversation the world would ever witness between them. Ryan Reynolds didn't respond immediately. The world was in shock, processing the loss of a woman who had been a constant presence in American culture for over 80 years. And then, hours later, he posted again. No jokes this time. No playful banter. Just a photo of Betty White giving 2 thumbs up and words that cut straight to the heart. "The world looks different now," he wrote. "She was great at defying expectation. She managed to grow very old and somehow not old enough. We'll miss you, Betty. Now you know the secret." That final line, "Now you know the secret," hit differently. Because for years, Betty White had talked about her late husband, Alan Ludden, who died in 1981. She'd always said she never feared death because she believed she'd be with him again. And now, Ryan was telling her, now she knows. Now she's with Alan. It was a tribute that understood who Betty White really was, not just as an actress, but as a woman who had loved deeply and never stopped loving. But how did this friendship even begin? How did a man in his early 30s and a woman in her late 80s form a bond that would become one of Hollywood's most endearing relationships? The answer starts on the set of a romantic comedy that nobody expected to be particularly memorable. It was 2009, and Sandra Bullock was at the peak of her career. She'd signed on to star in The Proposal, playing a high-powered executive who forces her assistant to marry her to avoid deportation. Ryan Reynolds was cast as that assistant, a role that would require him to have great chemistry with Bullock. But the script called for one more crucial character. The assistant's grandmother, a woman living in Alaska, who would steal every scene she was in. The producers needed someone with impeccable comedic timing, someone who could hold her own against two of the biggest stars in Hollywood. They needed Betty White. White was 87 years old when she got the call. She'd been working in television since 1939, 7 decades of experience that had made her a legend. But she wasn't coasting on reputation. When she read the script for The Proposal, she saw something she liked. The character, Gammy Annie, wasn't just a sweet old grandmother. She had edge. She had secrets. She had a scene where she'd be dancing around a fire, chanting, participating in what the film presented as a Native American ritual. It was the kind of role that could have been a disaster in the wrong hands, but Betty White knew exactly how to play it, with both respect and humor. And when she heard that Ryan Reynolds and Sandra Bullock were attached, she didn't hesitate. She wanted in. Reynolds, for his part, was already a fan. He'd grown up watching Betty White on television, like everyone else in America, but meeting her in person was something different. From day one on set, there was a spark. Not romantic, obviously, but comedic. They had the same sense of humor, the same willingness to push boundaries, the same understanding that the best comedy often comes from the most unexpected places. And Betty White, at 87, was not slowing down. She was sharper than actors half her age. She remembered her lines perfectly. She improvised brilliantly, and she had a mouth on her that could make a sailor blush. During filming, they shot a behind-the-scenes video, a fake feud between Reynolds and White that was pure comedic gold. In it, Betty keeps getting Ryan's name wrong, calling him Ryan Restless, or just completely blanking on who he is. When he tries to correct her, she cuts him off. When Betty White says she wants a cup of coffee, you get her a cup of coffee, you ab-crunching jackass. The profanity was bleeped, but the attitude was pure Betty, and Ryan Reynolds was in heaven. The film came out in June of 2009, and while it wasn't a masterpiece, it was exactly what audiences wanted, a fun, light, romantic comedy with stellar performances. Betty White stole every scene she was in. Critics singled her out. Audiences loved her. And suddenly, at 87 years old, Betty White was having another moment. But more importantly, she'd made a friend. Ryan Reynolds didn't just move on to his next project and forget about the woman who'd played his grandmother. Instead, he started a tradition. Every January 17th, Betty White's birthday, he'd post a tribute on social media. And every single time, he'd refer to her as his ex-girlfriend. In January of 2018, he posted a photo of himself in full Deadpool costume, holding a martini in one hand and a hot dog in the other. There was a framed picture of Betty White eating a hot dog in the shot, too. The caption read, "Happy birthday to the one and only Betty White." It was a reference to an interview she'd done with Parade magazine, where she'd revealed her secrets to a long life. Vodka and hot dogs, probably in that order. The post went viral. Fans loved the ongoing joke. And Betty White, she played right along. In January of 2019, Reynolds posted a throwback photo of himself and Betty holding hands on a talk show. "I don't usually post about ex-girlfriends," he wrote, "but Betty's special. Happy birthday to the one and only." It was cheeky, it was fun, and it kept their friendship in the public eye. But Betty White wasn't content to just be the punchline. When reporters asked her about Ryan's posts, she had a response ready. "I've heard Ryan can't get over his thing for me," she said with perfect comedic delivery. "But Robert Redford is the one." Robert Redford, another Hollywood legend, even got in on the joke. When asked for comment, he told reporters, "I had a crush on her, too." It was all in good fun, but underneath the humor was something genuine. Ryan Reynolds truly admired Betty White. He'd talk about her in interviews, praising not just her comedic timing, but her work ethic, her kindness, her refusal to slow down. He'd mention how the scripts for The Golden Girls were only 35 pages long because so much of the comedy came from Betty just looking at her castmates. He'd joke about her being a typical Capricorn, sleeping all day and out all night, boozing and snacking on men. But behind every joke was real affection, and Betty White felt the same way. She'd talk about Ryan in interviews, always with that twinkle in her eye, always keeping the joke alive. When Deadpool came out in 2016, she even recorded a profanity-laced review for his promotional campaign. "It was glorious," she said in a video that had to be heavily edited for language. Once in a generation, a movie comes along that your whole family will love if your family is a group of kissing inbreds. Plus, Ryan Reynolds looks so handsome in his red leather suit, I give it 4 Golden Girls. It was outrageous. It was hilarious. And it showed that at 94 years old, Betty White still had more edge than actors a third her age. For over a decade, this pattern continued. Every birthday Ryan would post. Every interview, Betty would keep the joke going. They'd team up with Sandra Bullock for comedy sketches. They'd reference each other in the press. It became one of those rare Hollywood friendships that felt real, not manufactured for publicity. Because both of them understood something fundamental. Comedy is a love language. The teasing, the playful jabs, the ongoing bit about being ex-lovers, all of it was a way of saying, I see you. I appreciate you. You matter to me. And as Betty White got older, approaching her 100th birthday, that friendship mattered more and more. By December of 2021, Betty White was a cultural icon preparing for a milestone that seemed impossible. She was about to turn 100 years old. People magazine put her on the cover. Documentaries were being prepared. A theatrical release called Betty White: A Celebration was scheduled for January 17th, her actual birthday, featuring tributes from friends including Ryan Reynolds, Robert Redford, Tina Fey, and dozens of others. She gave interviews talking about her life, her career, her secrets to longevity. I'm so lucky to be in such good health and feel so good at this age, she told people. I was born a cockeyed optimist. And then, in one of those interviews, she brought up Ryan Reynolds. It wasn't planned. The reporter asked her about their friendship, and Betty, being Betty, couldn't resist. I've heard Ryan can't get over his thing for me, she said, grinning. But Robert Redford is the one. The article came out on December 30th. Ryan Reynolds saw it, and true to form, he responded with humor. I'm absolutely sick of the media exploiting past relationships just to drive clicks, he tweeted, linking to the People article. It was perfect. Fans laughed. Betty's quote was shared across social media. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed like just another chapter in their long-running joke. But behind the scenes, something was wrong. On December 25th, Christmas Day, Betty White had suffered a stroke. Not a massive one, not the kind that would have sent her to the hospital immediately, but significant enough. She was at home in Brentwood, the same house she'd lived in for decades. Her team was with her. They were monitoring her condition. But strokes are unpredictable, especially in someone 99 years old. And 6 days later, on the morning of December 31st, Betty White died in her sleep. The news broke on New Year's Eve. The timing felt cruel. America was preparing to ring in 2022, and instead we were mourning the loss of a woman who had been a constant presence for generations. Social media exploded. Tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment industry. Presidents, actors, comedians, musicians, everyone had something to say about Betty White. And Ryan Reynolds, he went silent. For hours, he didn't post anything. The world knew he'd seen the news. Everyone was waiting to see what he'd say. And then, that evening, he finally spoke. The photo was simple. Betty White, smiling, giving 2 thumbs up. The caption was brief, but devastating. The world looks different now. She was great at defying expectation. She managed to grow very old and somehow not old enough. We'll miss you, Betty. Now you know the secret. That phrase, "Now you know the secret," carried so much weight. Betty White had spent 40 years as a widow, never remarrying after Alan Ludden died in 1981. She'd talk about him in interviews, about how he was the love of her life, about how she looked forward to seeing him again. Her agent later confirmed that Betty never feared death because she believed she'd be reunited with Alan, and Ryan Reynolds in his tribute acknowledged that. He didn't just mourn her loss. He celebrated her belief. He told her, essentially, "You made it. You're with him now." It was a tribute that understood who Betty White was at her core. Not just America's grandmother, not just a comedic genius, but a woman who had loved deeply and never stopped loving. In the days that followed, more details emerged. The stroke had happened on Christmas, 6 days before her death. She'd been at home, peaceful, surrounded by people who loved her. There was no pain, no suffering, just a quiet slipping away. Her death certificate would later list the cause as cerebrovascular accident, the medical term for stroke. Natural causes. She was 99 years old, and she'd lived every single year fully. The documentary, Betty White, A Celebration, still came out on January 17th as planned. It felt like a gift, a chance for fans to celebrate her life rather than just mourn her death. Ryan Reynolds was in it, of course, talking about their friendship, about her humor, about how she'd made him laugh more than anyone else in Hollywood. But the documentary also captured something else: how rare it is to find genuine connection in an industry built on image and performance. Ryan Reynolds and Betty White didn't just play at being friends. They were friends. The age gap didn't matter. The fact that they'd only worked together on one film didn't matter. What mattered was that they saw each other clearly, appreciated each other genuinely, and never let the joke overshadow the real affection underneath. For over a decade, they made each other laugh. They kept a running gag alive across social media, interviews, and public appearances. And when the end came, when Betty White died just 17 days before her 100th birthday, Ryan Reynolds didn't make a joke. He made a promise. Now you know the secret. It was the perfect goodbye, not mournful, not tragic, but hopeful, because Betty White had always believed in something beyond this life, and Ryan, in his final words to her, affirmed that belief. She'd spent 40 years waiting to be reunited with Alan Ludden, and now, according to the man who joked about being her boyfriend for 12 years, she finally was. The world did look different after Betty White died. A little less funny, a little less warm. But her friendship with Ryan Reynolds remains as a reminder of something important. Genuine connection transcends everything. Age, fame, image, all of it falls away when two people see each other for who they really are. And for 12 years, through jokes and tributes and playful teasing, Ryan Reynolds and Betty White showed the world what that looks like. She called him her crush who couldn't let go. He called her his ex-girlfriend. And when she was gone, he called her what she really was: irreplaceable. "The world looks different now," he wrote, and he was right, because there will never be another Betty White, and there will never be another friendship quite like theirs.